a routine takeoff, a cutting-edge aircraft for its time, and an experienced crew were at the center of one of the deadliest air disasters of the 1980s. The smell of burning and a violent vibration, shaking the plane to its core, challenged the pilots of British Midland Flight 92. But suddenly one engine burst into flames just minutes before landing, disintegrating midair. The pilots promptly shut down the affected engine and attempted to land with just one engine operational. But as they approached the runway threshold, they realized they had shut down the wrong engine, escalating the crisis. Why would such a seasoned crew make such a basic error in an emergency? This is the story of British Midland Flight 92. January 8, 1989, London Heathrow International Airport. In the international terminal stood the star of the story, a Boeing 737-400. At the time of the accident, this aircraft was just a few months old. The 737-400 was one of Boeing's newest variants, featuring significant updates to compete with the innovative Airbus A320, launched as its direct competitor in the same era. The traditional analog dials were replaced by cutting-edge digital screens in the cockpit. Boeing assured that these modernizations wouldn't present major difficulties for pilots already familiar with the Boeing 737. Instead of requiring simulator sessions, transitioning to the new 737-400 could be accomplished with a few hours of classroom instruction and a thorough review of the flight manual. This decision drastically reduced training costs for Boeing and airlines, saving millions of dollars. However, Flight 92 would pay the price for these decisions. The updates weren't trivial. Many systems had been altered, including how critical information, such as cabin pressurization and air conditioning systems, was presented to the pilots. The safety of the 126 passengers and 8 crew members aboard Flight 92 depended on pilots who had never undergone simulator training for emergency procedures specific to the new Boeing 737-400. The flight was scheduled to land at Belfast International Airport in Northern Ireland, a journey of approximately 1 hour. Most passengers were tourists or business travelers. On board were 5 cabin crew members and 2 pilots in charge of operating the aircraft. In the captain's seat was Kevin Hunt, age 43, one of the airline's most seasoned pilots, with 22 years of experience and 13,176 flight hours, 763 of which were on the Boeing 737. First Officer David McClellan, age 39, had joined British Midland a year earlier. He had 3,290 flight hours, with 192 hours on the Boeing 737. While both pilots were experienced with the 737, they were relatively new to this modernized variant. The captain had only 23 hours of flight time on the 737-400, and the first officer had 53 hours. Once passenger boarding was complete and luggage was properly secured, the captain ordered the doors to be closed to initiate pushback and taxi to the runway. The first officer took charge of taxiing the aircraft to the assigned runway, following the air traffic controller's instructions, while the captain prepared the plane for takeoff. Meanwhile, the flight attendants conducted the pre-flight safety demonstration. Shortly before 8 p.m., the modern aircraft aligned with the runway and commenced its takeoff roll. The plane lifted off without issue and began its short 1-hour journey to Belfast.
Positive rate of climb.
As the aircraft climbed to its cruising altitude of 35,000 feet, passengers settled in for what appeared to be a smooth flight, unaware that everything would soon change drastically. At around 28,000 feet, the aircraft suddenly began shaking violently. In the rear cabin, passengers saw trays and personal belongings tumble to the floor. A strong smell, like burning oil, began to spread from mid-cabin throughout the passenger area. Terrified, some passengers began coughing as the contaminated air filled the cabin. The situation became critical, and the pilots needed to act quickly to prevent severe health issues from toxic fume inhalation. In the cockpit, the pilots swiftly analyzed the instruments and engine status. They had to identify the problem source accurately and resolve it before it worsened. Captain Hunt decided that the first officer would diagnose the issue while he manually flew the plane, focusing solely on controlling the aircraft. This decision placed the responsibility for identifying the problem squarely on the less experienced first officer, a questionable call given the stakes. While the first officer was focused on diagnosing the issue they were facing, Captain Hunt was trying to piece together what could be going wrong and why the strong smell of burning oil and fuel began almost immediately alongside the violent shaking. He speculated that the issue might be related to one of the engines. Based on his familiarity with earlier versions of the 737, he knew the right engine typically supplied air to the cabin, and the burning smell made sense if that engine was the source of the problem. What Captain Hunt didn't realize was that in the 737-400 variant, cabin air was supplied by both engines, the right and the left. This meant that at this point, they technically didn't know which engine was causing the issue or the burning smell. Captain Hunt asked the first officer if he could identify which engine was affected. However, the first officer hesitated, uncertain about how to interpret the central panel's indications at that moment. The intense vibrations in the cockpit were likely contributing to the difficulty in focusing on the instruments. The Boeing 737-400, being more advanced and modern compared to its analog predecessors, had multiple indicators that could have helped the pilots identify the problematic engine almost immediately if they had received the proper training. During the intense vibrations, the left engine indicators showed nearly maximum vibration levels. The fan oscillations were erratic, fuel flow readings fluctuated, and exhaust gas temperatures were significantly higher than normal compared to the right engine. These discrepancies clearly indicated that the N1 engine was experiencing severe issues. The first officer's hesitant response to the captain's question may have stemmed from a lack of familiarity with the engine indicator layout. He wasn't sure if the higher vibration reading corresponded to the left engine or the right one, as the panel did not explicitly label them. Under stress from the severe cockpit vibrations and the urgency to find a solution, the first officer mistakenly informed the captain that the right engine was the source of the problem. This error aligned with Captain Hunt's initial suspicion that the engine number 2 was causing the burning smell and erratic vibrations. Acting on this assumption, the captain instructed the first officer to throttle back the engine number 2, an engine that was operating perfectly fine, unaware that the engine number 1 was essentially disintegrating. Another critical factor the pilots overlooked, likely due to the high-stress environment, was the bank angle of the wings. The moment the captain disengaged the autopilot, the aircraft immediately rolled slightly to the left, even though the captain hadn't moved the controls. This roll was caused by the left engine producing significantly less thrust than the right engine. The imbalance of thrust caused the wings to tilt opposite to the engine generating more power, providing a clear clue as to which engine was failing. How could they miss this? Perhaps it was the darkness of the night, which made it difficult to perceive the aircraft's turn to the left. Or perhaps their focus on solving the issue caused them to miss the artificial horizon indicator, which clearly showed a leftward roll. Almost instinctively, Captain Hunt corrected the slight left bank, but failed to investigate the cause of the roll further. Meanwhile, in the rear of the aircraft, alarmed passengers had already realized that the left engine was in serious trouble. They could see sparks and flames erupting from the rear of the engine, unaware that the pilots were still uncertain about the source of the issue, despite the instruments providing clear indications. Then, resuming the previous actions, First Officer McClellan complied with the captain's request, reducing the number 2 engine's power to idle. Simultaneously, the captain slightly decreased the number 1 engine's power, which significantly reduced the vibrations within the cabin and minimized the burnt smell. This gave the captain a misleading impression that throttling down the number 2 engine was the correct decision. However, what actually occurred was that reducing the power in both engines interrupted the circulation of excess fuel, which was being improperly consumed in the number 1 engine. This consumption was the real cause of the vibrations and explosions, and had nothing to do with the number 2 engine, which had been operating flawlessly. With the burnt smell nearly gone and the severe vibrations drastically reduced, the pilots believed they had temporarily resolved the issue. They decided the next step was to find the nearest airport for an emergency landing to prevent a more critical situation and safeguard the lives of their passengers. First Officer McClellan contacted Air Traffic Control to report an emergency, stating they needed to land as soon as possible due to a potential fire in one of the engines. Captain Hunt considered shutting down the number 2 engine to mitigate any risk of a possible fire. He contacted the airline's operations center to inform them of the situation, while the first officer continued discussions with air traffic control to determine the best diversion airport. Meanwhile, at the rear of the aircraft, flames and sparks from the number 1 engine on the left side had subsided, which slightly reassured passengers who were still unaware of the seriousness of the situation. Due to the urgency, the pilots chose to divert to East Midlands Airport, which was nearby and equipped to handle emergencies. Additionally, it was the airline's operations base. First Officer McClellan informed the passengers of the technical issue, explaining that for safety reasons, the flight was diverting to East Midlands Airport to inspect the aircraft. He apologized for the inconvenience and change of plans. Flight 92 adjusted its course toward the new destination as the first officer prepared for descent and approach. He conducted another engine failure check and mistakenly confirmed that the suspected problem engine was stable, believing the situation was under control. Meanwhile, Captain Hunt concluded his communication with the airline's operations center. First Officer McClellan then shut off the fuel supply to the number 2 engine, which had been thoroughly verified as the functioning engine. The engine began its shutdown sequence, leaving the aircraft reliant on the severely damaged number 1 engine. As soon as this action was taken, the burnt smell in the cabin vanished, further reinforcing the pilot's mistaken belief that shutting down the N2 engine was the right decision. En route to the airport, Captain Hunt called a flight attendant to ask if anything unusual had been observed in the passenger area. She reported that flames had been visible from one of the engines and that strange noises were coming from the left side of the aircraft. Captain Hunt was puzzled. Why had flames been seen on the left side if the issue was presumed to be with the right engine? At this point, the captain continued manually flying the aircraft while the first officer handled radio communications and set up the approach to the new diversion airport. Passengers remained deeply concerned, especially those seated on the left side, who had seen flames earlier. A flight attendant informed the cockpit that many passengers were becoming increasingly alarmed. Captain Hunt decided to address the cabin, explaining that the smoke and burnt smell were due to an issue with the right engine, which they had shut down, and that they were descending toward East Midlands Airport. This explanation confused many passengers, as they were certain the smoke and flames had come from the left side. Why had the right engine been shut down? Was there also an issue with it? Despite these doubts, the passengers relied on the pilot's expertise. Flight 92 continued its approach to East Midlands Airport, operating with only the severely damaged number 1 engine. As they neared the runway, the workload for both pilots increased substantially. While the captain flew the aircraft manually, The first officer handled communications and attempted to configure the flight management system. However, due to significant changes in the FMS and other instruments on the Boeing 737-400, the first officer struggled to use it effectively, relying on directions from air traffic control to navigate toward the runway. For a few minutes, the cockpit was relatively stable as the pilots followed the air traffic controller's instructions. They began the checklist for a single-engine approach, but the constant interruptions from air traffic control left the pilots overwhelmed, forcing them to complete the checklist only partially. At approximately 6,000 feet, the captain configured the aircraft for landing, deploying the first 3 stages of flaps to reduce speed. At 3,000 feet, Captain Hunt increased power to the N1 engine slightly. This action caused the already stressed engine to experience severe vibrations and stress, raising concerns about its ability to sustain operation. As the aircraft descended closer to the runway, the flaps were extended further, and the landing gear was deployed, increasing drag. To maintain descent speed and prevent a stall, they pushed the damaged number 1 engine harder, resulting in exponential vibration increases. Suddenly, a massive flame erupted from the rear of the engine, shaking the aircraft violently and terrifying passengers. With the aircraft losing speed rapidly and the number 1 engine disintegrating, the pilots attempted to restart the number 2 engine, but there was insufficient time for it to spool up. The aircraft, now without power, effectively became a massive glider. Desperate, the pilots tried to raise the nose for a glide toward the runway. However, the weight and descent angle made stabilization nearly impossible. With ground proximity warnings blaring, Captain Hunt instructed the crew to brace for impact. The aircraft struck the M1 motorway, skidding into a mound on the opposite side. It broke into 3 sections, leaving a catastrophic scene at the crash site. Remarkably, no motors were injured, and vehicles on the motorway remained undamaged. Tragically, 44 passengers lost their lives instantly, and 66 others sustained severe injuries. Among the crew, 7, including both pilots, were seriously hurt. What caused the initial issues with the number 1 engine? Why did the pilots shut down the wrong engine? Following the accident, almost all Boeing 737-400 aircraft were grounded to investigate how such a technologically advanced plane could suffer such a catastrophic failure. Extensive analysis revealed that the engine number 1 fan blades experienced abnormal vibration levels during high-power operation above 10,000 feet. This vibration led to metal fatigue, causing one of the fan blades to fracture during the climb to cruising altitude. The blade's failure severely damaged the engine, leading to its eventual destruction. As a result of this accident, the Boeing 737-400's engines were redesigned to minimize vibration and prevent metal fatigue, ensuring safer operation in the future. Intensive courses and training programs were also implemented for pilots to better manage high-stress situations, emphasizing correct decision-making without rushing, and thoroughly analyzing all available data before taking any action. The importance of utilizing the aircraft's automated systems, such as autopilot, during most phases of flight was also highlighted. This approach aims to reduce pilot workload and allow greater focus on problem solving. In Flight 92, Captain Hunt paid little attention to the other systems, as he was preoccupied with manually flying the aircraft when it would have been far more critical to focus on analyzing instrument readings. Following the accident, Both pilots were relieved of duty and dismissed due to the decisions and actions taken during Flight 92. Later, during a press conference, Captain Hunt stated, "We were the easiest and cheapest option if you want to look at it that way. Yes, we made mistakes. Both of us made mistakes. But the question we want answered is, why did we make those mistakes? Why wasn't there proper training and adequate preparation for pilots regarding changes in the aircraft systems? This accident had a significant impact on the aviation industry, shedding light on systematic failures and protocol errors. It sparked a stronger focus on accountability and better pilot training. What is certain is that, because of this tragedy, aviation today is far safer, thanks to the lessons learned from British Midwest Airways Flight 92. Remember, the purpose of this video is not to judge those involved, but to provide an investigation and understanding of the events and reasons that led to the tragedy. May all those who lost their lives in this devastating accident rest in eternal peace. Please don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next episode.